We're live. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the 20th May 20th meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nation and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. And before I begin, I've got a little note here. I remind members of the public that comments can be submitted by email to council@parksville.ca. The first staff report on this afternoon's agenda will provide an opportunity for public input on a proposed development variance permit. Anyone wishing to submit comment to council on this DVP, development variance permit, is encouraged to do so by email at this time. Emails received by the time the report is considered, we will read into the public record and be considered by council. Okay, so get those cards and letters coming in. So here we go. Everybody's ready. We're going to go through the consent agenda first off. Minutes of for the four parts. I need a mover and a seconder for the consent agenda. Somebody can move by Councillor O'Brien, second by Councillor Greer. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. We have one delegation this afternoon. It's Ms. Lenora Lee, and she's going to present on behalf of KPMG. Lenora, you're there. Thank you.
Yes. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Wonderful. So I wanted to just provide some highlights of the financial statements for the City of Parksville for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2019. The audit is substantially complete, and the auditor's report as attached is a clean and unqualified audit opinion. It indicates that the financial statements present fairly and have been prepared in accordance with the public sector accounting standards. There are no qualifications or material errors that we've noted in the course of our audit. The only items that remain outstanding at this time are those that you would expect, being a review of the statements by council, acceptance, and receipt of the management representation letter, which just indicates from management that we've received all the information we need to complete the audit and that they do present accurately the activities of the city as at and for the year ended December 31st, 2019. We have reviewed in detail the audit findings report with the audit committee, and so I'll just provide some highlights of the financial statements to council today. The assets and liabilities of the City of Parksville as at December 31st, 2019 showed net financial assets of approximately 28 million. That was very consistent and stable with prior years, and small increases as it relates to surplus that was earned during the course of the year. The assets of the city were approximately 51 million, and the liabilities, including cash and non-cash liabilities, were 23 million. The investment into capital assets of the city were approximately 198 million, and the accumulated surplus of the city at the end of 2019 was 227 million. That accumulated surplus represents the surpluses from the inception or incorporation of the city, but also includes the investment that has been spent on capital. So I'll provide shortly a detail of the composition of that accumulated surplus. In terms of revenues and expenses, again, very consistent and stable with previous years. Total revenues of the city were approximately 34 million. Total expenses of the city were 24 million. And as a result, there was an annual surplus of approximately 10 million. From an accounting perspective, the statement of operations shows revenues and expenses excluding the investment into capital assets. And so of this 10 million of surplus, all of that essentially was invested into capital assets during the year. That investment totaled approximately 9 million for the year. And then in terms of accumulated surplus, that is detailed in Note 10 to the financial statements. I had indicated accumulated surplus was 227 million. Of that balance, 198 million has been invested and spent already into capital assets. There's approximately 14 million set aside in reserves. So that's comprised of a combination of operating and capital reserves. And there's a remaining unrestricted surplus of approximately 20 million. And that's monies that are available for use for either general revenue fund, water utility, sewer utility, both operating and capital, and also general reserves available for contingency, expansion of service, or unexpected events. Overall, the city is in a strong financial position. There certainly is liquidity within the city, access to cash and investments to meet upcoming obligations, as well as work through some of the uncertainties that arise in 2020 as a result of COVID-19 that may impact both the amount and timing of property tax collection. Those are the highlights of the statements that I wanted to address, but happy to address any comments that you may have. And also just wanted to express our appreciation to management and staff for their assistance with the audit and a very clean position to present to you today.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Excellent job as always, and we do appreciate it. Compliments to our staff for doing a great job over the last 12 months to get us in this position. The city is in amazingly strong financial position, better than just about anybody else around. And I'm very, very proud of that fact. I'd like to be able for this council to take all the credit, but it's come from councils in the past as well. So having said that, thank you very much. If there's any questions, please bring them out now. And if not, I'd like to move recommendations 1 and 2 together if we possibly could.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Patterson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We have one piece of correspondence for information from the Oceanside Stroke Recovery Society and appreciation for the grant and aid funding. I need a mover and a seconder for receiving that piece of correspondence. Moved by Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor Chandler. Thank you. Any discussion on it? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Mr. Russell, you're on here somewhere on the screen. So would you please give us the background for the issue regarding the variance permit?
Certainly, if I may, Your Worship. So there's 2 aspects for council's consideration. One is the issuance of a development variance permit, and the other is the issue of an associated development permit. Since this application was last presented to council, required notice has now occurred. It was done through mail out to approximately 67 different addresses. Since that time, we have received 3 correspondence with respect to this, with respect to the development variance permit application. 3 of them are in opposition. 2 of them are from the same person. However, one has a 26 signature petition attached to it. As per the staff report, the variances for council consideration are a relaxation to allow for privacy screens along the side yard area in an area that also is used for recreational purposes. There's a variance to the front to allow the building to be closer to Hirst Avenue from the standard setback of 6 meters to 4.5. There's also a fence relaxation to allow for just for the trellises themselves. The rest of the fence will maintain its normal height, but there will be trellises that are proposed as a decorative feature. And there's also a relaxation to the parking requirements from the standard of 1.5 per dwelling unit to 1.2 per dwelling unit. And that was analyzed by Watt Consulting, a traffic engineer. And their recommendation was actually that 1 per unit was sufficient in this location. They're proposing 1.2 for the proposal. As far as the planning rationale, that's in the body of the two staff reports that were presented to council on April the 6th and this report on May the 20th. However, if there's further information that council would like, I'd be happy to provide additional detail.
Thank you. Thank you for your report. Do I have a mover for recommendations 1 and 2?
If I could, Mayor,
Yes.
I wanted to propose that we defer this item to our next council meeting once we've had a chance. I assume that we're going to be back in the forum and have public available. I was wanting to defer it to when public can come in and speak to this.
Okay. So you're asking for a motion to defer. I need a seconder for that motion. Councillor Chandler is making that. I'm going to ask for some advice here. Deferral, am I allowed discussion, or does it go directly?
No discussion.
No discussion? All right, so it's just a vote then. All those in favor of deferring until the next meeting? Opposed? Fair enough. Let's move it on to the next meeting. Thank you. Besides, we get to watch Mr. Russell make that whole presentation again. Next in June. Mr. Russell, could you please give us the background on the next issue?
If I may, Your Worship, the next issue for council consideration is an application for a road closure. This application was presented to council previously. It was originally in conjunction with a rezoning application. While the rezoning application was defeated, the road closure application was referred back to staff. Staff have further reviewed this with the engineering department to look at what are the, should the city give up this land? What are the capabilities to the road network? Staff have determined that there's still sufficient room there that a roundabout could be facilitated if that was a desirable traffic solution in that area. So from a planning perspective and from a road traffic engineering kind of perspective, there's not an issue with the land being disposed of. However, if council has other visions for the land, then there may be an argument for retention. So it's entirely at council's discretion whether or not to proceed further.
I think I'm going to break this into two parts. So the first one, if you would, I need a mover and a seconder to receive the report.
So moved.
By Councillor Wilson, second by Councillor Patterson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Number 2, I need a mover and a seconder for that as well. Councillor Greer is moving it. Do I have a seconder?
I'd like to make a separate motion on that.
You want a different motion than what's on here?
Yes.
I'm willing to listen. Please go ahead.
I would suggest that we leave the road the way it is, and we remain the property owners of that property until further time when we might know what happens at that intersection. This intersection is one of the busiest ones in town, and it's going to get nothing but busier.
Whoa. Hold on, Councillor Greer. Just make the motion, and you can make the argument
Okay.
after we get it seconded. Okay. So you're making that.
The motion is to maintain that property for the city.
I'm going to ask again. I'm sorry, just to make sure that by defeating this motion, we end up in the same place, do we not? I'm looking for help from the CAO.
If I may, Your Worship, I believe Councillor Greer is wanting to propose a motion that the city retain ownership. So that would replace recommendation 2 and 3, which would, if approved by council, forward this to the sale and road closure process. So if Councillor Greer is making a motion at this point to retain the land and gets it seconded, that would replace items 2 and 3 on the agenda.
That's what I'm after.
Yep. All right. I need a seconder for
I'll second it.
Councillor Wilson. I have a point that's being made by Director Russell.
If I may, Your Worship, I believe you are correct in that defeat of the motion would also achieve the same objective, and that the road closure process would end.
Okay, so we're at 6 and 2/3 here. So we're halfway into this one. We've got a motion moved and seconded. Any discussion on Councillor Greer's? Councillor Greer, you get the first shot at it.
Well, my reason for that is the fact that this is the busiest intersection in town. And I think it's going to do nothing but get busier over the time. And I think we should maintain that property because we might need to rearrange that road or roundabout or whatever. And I don't think at this time there's no rush to sell it. So I'm all for maintaining it.
All right. Councillor Wilson, I see your hand up, and then Councillor Fraz right after that.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So thank you, Councillor Greer, for making that, because I was going to make a motion like that too. I didn't know you could jump in, so I'm really happy about it. A couple of things I just want to say that I'm just looking at my notes here that I agree, it's too soon to sell, it's premature. There are many uses that we might have for that piece of land, since we've already given up land before that we question the merit in doing such. And right now we have the Parks and Open Spaces Committee, which is looking for different options for things such as food gardens, and you know, that space could be used for many other things like overflow, and as Councillor Greer said, traffic is a huge thing there. So I think keeping that land is absolutely the best thing to do right now. Thank you.
Councillor Fraz.
Thank you. This question through the mayor to staff. Just curious for some clarity on the portion that we're talking about here. In the aerial photo, I see that there's a lot with a house on it, and then there's also a kind of greenery space right adjacent to the road. In Schedule A, it has it described as road, but it's obviously it's a sidewalk and bench there. Are we looking at, is just speaking just to the lot that the house is on? Is that correct? Or is it the entirety right up to what's currently Despard Avenue?
It's the property beside the house that's
Hold on,
that's
Councillor
there
Greer.
now.
Hold on, Councillor Greer. I will push the question over to Director Russell.
Certainly, if I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Adam Fraz. So what is called road on the legal plan is very different from what is actually constructed. So the legal road is the whole right of way, including sidewalk, grass boulevard, etc. In this case, if you look on the air photo, the area that appears as lawn on the air photo, that would still be retained by the city should this road closure proceed. Essentially, the power lines to kind of the midpoint of where the power lines sort of go up across that property, that is about where the transition is between what the city would retain and what is proposed to be included in the road closure application.
Okay, and if I may, for follow-up, when you talk about room for expansion for roundabout, then it would be cutting into what's like this side of the north side of the power lines then.
Correct. If you look on, we've actually included in the engineering memorandum. So it's on page, what page is it in the agenda? On the staff report, it's Schedule D of the staff report. And I don't see the agenda numbering on the copy I downloaded. So
yeah, page 55 is what I see here.
Yeah, so that's where you can see what a roundabout would look like in that area. So a lot of that grass area is still retained even with the roundabout.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you. And through your worship, if I could, to Director Russell, is there a pending development permit on this property as well?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor O'Brien, not at this time. I think it's a question for the landowner that they may have a future plan for the site and they want to know, you know, to make those future plans. I suspect they bought it as an investment property. They need to know what they're working with in order to undertake future plans for the site. And obviously the site area that they have to work with can make a difference in what they're contemplating. So at this point, no, there's not an active application. Would I be surprised if there was an application within a couple of years? No, I wouldn't be. But I think they want to know, you know, how big the piece of paper is that they're drawing their future plans on.
as a follow-up, if I may, your worship, through, then there's nothing to stop this owner of this property from actually purchasing the property as they proposed for the 179 grand. Nothing to stop them from possibly just turning around and flipping it.
If I may, your worship, to Councillor O'Brien, yes, anyone could purchase the land and flip it at any point in time. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Just with no pending permit and the amount that is actually proposed and the amount of staff work that is done to construct that proposed roundabout, we've put quite a bit into it so far. I would certainly not support it as it was. I would support Mr. Greer's motion instead. Thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Fraz, we're on the second time around then. Go ahead.
Just want to mention to council then the consideration of if we're just talking about a portion of that property, like you say, the roundabout could still be constructed even if we were to close that road. If we were to close the road and use that and have the land available as land for future consideration, though, whether it be parkland or, as I mentioned, community gardens or so on, if it's not going to be used for road in the future, is there any point of maintaining it as a roadway? So just kind of thinking out loud there, but also looking for some feedback too. Is your thoughts on that?
Councillor Russell, do you have any comment on that?
If I may, your worship, also from a planning and engineering perspective, at this point in time, it's surplus. So we don't have a planning need for it, nor does there appear to be an engineering need for it at this point in time. But it doesn't mean that council might not have another desire for that land. All we can say is from a planning perspective. So maybe there's a public square that council wants or that we're not aware of.
Ms. Keeler. Ms. Keeler.
If I may, your worship, I think that part of the reason why council may be hesitating or maybe smart in hesitating to disclose or dispose of this piece of land is, as Councillor Greer mentioned, this intersection will look very, very different in the next year or two with all of the development that's happening there. And one of the things that personally, I think myself as someone who recently had young children, if you're coming from the school, there may be some benefit to retaining an area of refuge there for folks who are waiting to cross the road. But as many of us have experienced, the friends and the kids and the other folks that you're walking with might come in delayed intervals. And so this way you could sort of stay off to the side on a grassed area away from the highway. There's also been some discussion at the council level about public art and where developing a policy about where public art and public gathering spaces may be. And so at this point, my perspective, I think, is not representing planning or engineering at this point, but just keeping options open. I know that council has talked about some of the previous decisions to dispose of land that now are being regretted just because we have different plans. And so I think some of the hesitation as well is that there is not really a plan for what it would be used for if it were to be disposed of. And so that, from my perspective, I think are things that council, are I think within their rights for having some second thoughts or perhaps just not being clear that they want to get rid of this piece yet.
Thank you for your input. I'm going to speak and then I'll allow you, Councillor Wilson. I'm going to be voting in favor of this motion. Typically, I'm all for removing and selling off real estate if it doesn't have any worth to the city for future. But here, we don't know what we don't know on this piece of property. Yes, the roundabout fits without it, but that's going to be, as Councillor Greer pointed out, it's going to be the busiest intersection in the city. There's no doubt about that, with all the development that's going on around there, with the Insight development on one side, with the QF development on the other side, with we don't know what's going to ever happen to the forested area across the street. There's a number of things that could potentially make this even busier than it potentially could be at this point in time. I do believe that we have to wait and see. if we had a crystal ball and we could say that it's not going to affect anything, then perhaps that might be with it. I happen to totally agree with our director, our CAO rather, in the fact that this is a great landing area for kids coming down that school. You know what kids in grade 1s up to whatever it goes to 7, I guess, up there. They're all excited. They come to that corner. They're playing with their balls and everything else. What you wouldn't want is something to happen where your kid steps off a narrow sidewalk situation and out into traffic. This way it gives them lots of room there. So I'm going to vote in favor of this as well. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I totally agree with our CAO. And one of the notes I had made, and when I was talking actually to Director Russell about this project, was some of the options that you could do. It made me think about the art that the Parks and Open Spaces Committee, and that it really could be a landmark piece as you enter the city, because it is to this entry to the city, and also a place for people to gather. Totally agree with our CAO on that, a safety issue, as well as just a place for people to go have their lunch, whatever. We need that space. So I'm voting in favor of the motion.
Thank you. Anybody else? And if not, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of Councillor Greer's motion?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Carries. Thank you. Mr. Doxey, you're up next on the Pym Street North and Forsyth Avenue Renewal Project.
Okay, assuming everybody can hear me, if I may, through your worship, this report covers the award of a tender for the design, it's already been designed. It covers the award of the tender services for construction. It's for 250 meters of a 300 or 1 foot diameter asbestos concrete high pressure main. It services a good chunk of the western side of the city, indirectly, I guess, downstream of it. It also includes 170 meters of AC water main, along Forsyth, and some storm drainage upgrades on Forsyth. There are some minor storm sewer upgrades on Pym, but there are things like storm leads and relocating some catch basins. The project itself was actually, it's a bit convoluted, but it started out as two separate, this is ticking off two separate capital projects out of our capital program. So it's ticking off the Forsyth storm sewer upgrade, and it's ticking off the renewal of that water infrastructure primarily there on Pym. Both of these roads, Forsyth, the rest of the infrastructure is not up for renewal, and this is basically addressing some shortfalls and drainage issues that are befallen on that street. And similarly, Pym is a well-built out street. It's very close to the current urban standard. It has sidewalk. And so what this is simply replacing the water line as such. The two projects, the Forsyth and the Pym, were bundled for the purpose of facilitating an easy design, putting them both with one consulting engineer, and then similarly tendering them as a bulk for construction services. The one thing that's noted in here is we treated it like option 1 and option 2. The option 2 includes the replacement of the lights on Pym. They're currently leased lights through BC Hydro. A study, a small study, it was done back a couple of years, about 2017-18, by a consultant, basically evaluating the replacement of the LED high pressure sodium lease lights with LED city-owned lights. And the results of that indicated that it was about a 4 to 6 year payback period. And on a couple premises, we're recommending that the option 2, the street light replacement on Pym, take place. So that would be taking those lease lights and replacing them with LED. So one factor there would be the obvious energy conservation. The other factor there would be improving the lighting and extending the life. And another option there, or another benefit there, is that one of the street's corners right on Forsyth and Pym has a fairly new upgraded para ramp or handicap ramp for accessibility right on the corner. And about a meter or so downstream of it is immediately a power pole right in the middle of that said sidewalk and associated ramp. So one of the benefits of the LED street lamp replacement would certainly be the lower electricity use going on into perpetuity, the payback period of 4 to 6 years, and then of course improving and making do that accessibility that's already been attempted to be present. So the resolutions are per the report. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to address those from there.
Need to move on a seconder for the recommendations.
So moved.
Councillor Patterson, second by Councillor Greer. Discussion. Anybody have any questions? Discussion. So we're spending $165,000 on engineers. Is that my understanding?
That's correct. That's including I guess the record drawing, laying out, surveying, and then, yeah, I guess I said that completing the record drawing services is part of that. So, yes.
All right, we'll have that discussion at another time. All right. Any other discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor of the recommendations?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Ms. Joxie.
Okay, the next report is, if I may, through your worship again, through yourself. This is the local road standards, and it's a conversation that came up last year related to local road constructions, and it brought up the question of what type of standards should we be installing or constructing when we're doing renewals and upgrades. And it became centered around sidewalks, and we were directed to go back and take a look at locations where local road standards may want to have a more minimalistic approach as opposed to instating or reinstating full sidewalks everywhere. So I'm just going to attempt to share a screen here real quick. And if I fumble, well, hopefully I don't fumble. So now you should be seeing Appendix 3 that's been attached in the report. And hopefully it's a little bit easier to see this way. But what I'll explain the purpose or the point of this, and that is simply put, the yellow and the red roads depicted on the map are a combination of arterial roads. So you'll recognize Island Highway, you'll recognize Highway 4A, and they're also made up of collector roads in red. Similarly, there's some yellow roads in there. Those are local roads. The entire red and yellow make up what I'm calling, or what we're labeling here as the pedestrian priority network. They are largely taken from the Transportation Master Plan that was last updated in 2016. There's a few minor corrections. I don't know if you can see my little mouse pointer there, but there's a connection point there off of Wembley Road, or I guess it facilitates that connection through there to PIM. There were some pedestrian points going out to the ocean access points, and we determined that those were crescents or cul-de-sacs that were having such low volume that it didn't necessarily necessitate a sidewalk to a beach access point. And so those were simply removed just for practicality reasons. If you had, less than 500 vehicles a day on a road, you probably wouldn't need a sidewalk on there for that purpose. So that's kind of what we're depicting. I'll explain a couple more things here. So you'll see some dashed lines there in the yellow network, and you'll see some dashed lines in the red network there. Still the pedestrian priority network. Those are gaps in the system right now. In the table above, you'll see the quantity of the constructed road works in there. And then you'll see, let's see here, and you'll see some of the value there that are not depicted in the long-range capital plan. See there just below. So there are some gaps in the system that currently they're not going to get filled in on the current capital plan. That said, we are doing asset management right now, and pretty much every road lag and or pipe lag and type is up for evaluation. So things could shift around. This is just a picture of the system at this particular point in time. The next thing to explain in this is the darker blue roads. You'll see that they're in more or less more recent, say post 1990 developed areas, and they are developed either to the current standard or close to what is the current standard. And in some cases, they may even exceed it. Roads in there that have sidewalk actually on double side, and they could even be crescents. So they may not be real heavily utilized, but they're there and existing, and the plan would be a bit two-part. One, these are more recent construction inherited assets through the development industry. So because of their age, they're simply not coming up due for renewal in the next 20 years, so they don't affect that or impact that portion of the budget. And then the other side of it is because they're existing, you'll also note their proximity to the pedestrian priority network. So it is a bit of an offshoot where, maybe in 20 years that another round of decisions can be had on that. At that point in time, they may need to be incorporated into part of a pedestrian priority system, but that might be 15 or 20 or 25 years down the road. And then the other class of roadway there, I guess there's two more classes yet to go, is the light blue. Those are similarly more recently developed, but not as recent as the dark blue roads. They have curb and gutter. They look more or less like an urban road. They have street lights. They just simply do not have sidewalk. If council adopts this pedestrian priority plan into the capital program, those would they would not be planned to have sidewalk ever added when we do renewals. The last and most relevant section in here is the green, and the green is the rule and the set of roads. So they're basically 2 lanes, possibly a gravel shoulder, possibly not. Some have open ditches, some just have swales with no formalized drainage. And those are the largest area of gain by removing the sidewalk components from those. Through the adoption of this plan, potentially. You'll see the upper list on the right there. That is the list of potential savings. I just got to move my window of you guys is in my way. So that's the 3.7 million. And then, I'm sorry, that is the top one there is roads that would not likely to have ever been incorporated into the capital plan. I misspoke there. I'm sorry. Those are like cul-de-sacs, crescents. They would have been scoped out to be upgraded in the future upon renewal, but they, because of, again, similar to the beach access roads, they're such low volume roads that they would have not been identified for sidewalk down in the future. So the real savings is that lower table there of green rural roads. And there you can see in the bottom the potential savings on the roadway elements to the project. So that is the 13.9 million versus the 10.1 million. And that is that makes up, along with some of the yellow local roads and the blue local roads, when you add them all up, that equates to, on the current capital plan, approximately $5 million worth of savings. The one thing to note, though, that is the entire capital plan is being revisited through an evaluation of asset management. So we're realigning a lot of our roadblocks, the from and the tos. So the savings would certainly be rolled into the capital plan, but to take the current adopted budget and say knock off 5 million would put us in a bit of shortfall, because there's a lot of work yet in the capital program out in the future that needs to be scoped out in a lot more detail, and that's going to be coming through the asset management plan that we're working on. So if that's not complicated enough, I guess the resolutions are per the report, and I'll invite questions.
I need a motion before we go on to that. Can you take your...
Yes, sorry, let me stop sharing this. Goodness, just bear with me. There we go.
Here we go. I got all my smiling faces back. All right. I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. Do I have
So
that?
moved.
Chandler, Councillor O'Brien. Thank you. Discussion? Councillor Fraz is up. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Chandler goes first only because he made the motion, and then Councillor Fraz. Go ahead, Councillor Chandler.
That I think the plan is really solid. It's obviously well thought out over the last year, especially since this came forward to council. But the other thing I'd like to say is I travel all up and down the island, and I'm throughout all different communities in the last, especially the last year. And I think, you know, from previous planning and planning now and stuff that's gone on in the last couple of years, we can be really proud of what our community looks like. And I think continuing on that same path of looking at roads that may not need that sort of work is a really good plan to go with, and not spending a lot of money on it, you know, and the extra curbs and things we don't really need right now. So appreciate all the effort, and it was a great report. Thank you.
Councillor Fraz.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Joe Doxey. I'm wondering, I got a couple of streets here. I'm just curious as to the reasoning behind them. One of them being Jensen Avenue West. I see it marked as green. It says recommended. To me, it seems like it connects a large network of neighborhoods to the downtown area. I'm wondering why is recommended that there not be a sidewalk, at least on one side of that street. And I guess the other one too, I'll put out there as well, is I see Despard Avenue being a dashed line as well, and recognizing that it's currently under new construction, as to why we would not bring about our full standard sidewalks on both sides, being that it's a major connector road, and potential for further development on the I guess west side of the street there, or south side.
If I may, through your worship. So a couple questions. One is, you know, why some streets like Jensen West weren't selected, and that was its proximity. To put it simply, the proximity to the main road. I'm just having a hard time zooming in tight enough, but Hirst Avenue is technically the collector, and it would have sidewalks on both sides, and so. This was reviewed with the context of trying to minimize some of the sidewalk, and so when we could get a half block or a short block walk to a road that would have very good sidewalk or superior sidewalk coverage, we tried to minimize or reduce it, and so and that's why Jensen West doesn't have it. Despard, it is proposed to have it. It is in the network. It simply is. It's a project that hasn't hit the capital program yet. I know it's being a collector. It's something that, like you'll note on the north side of the road, we had that done as part of development. And I think the previous thought process, or the up to date, the planning has been that can happen in conjunction with development as a driver for the need for that sidewalk. It's certainly something for council consideration with school walk zones and increased density that's happening on the north side, that maybe that does want to be stuck into the capital program in the future. But for right now, that's kind of why it's been not included. So like there's going to be a few blocks all around where, you know, there's, you know, multi-unit that just doesn't front the what is the pedestrian priority. But if you look at it closely, I think you'll see everybody should be within about a block, you know, basically a block or two to a PED network path, and then also we're trying to consider the traffic volumes of those streets, so the lesser roads, not necessarily being the ones marked for having the sidewalk surfaces. Yeah.
If I can with a follow up there, I guess I see that for Despard too in the future, as if there's any further development, you know, they could always implement the sidewalks on their side. The Jensen Avenue West one, though, I think could be potentially a mistake, is just as far as like I recognize that it's close geographically to where there are sidewalks there, but so I don't have the name of the street right in front of me. It's the not a cul-de-sac, but it has like a little circle in there. I can't recall the name. I don't have it in front of me right now. But if I was living in that neighborhood there and wanting to walk downtown, I wouldn't be walking down towards Hirst. I'd be walking out towards Jensen, and being in such a close proximity to town, I'd be more inclined to want to walk. And if I was walking with anyone, whether it's a scooter or a wheelchair or any, wanting to ride a bike or something, I think Jensen Avenue West, once I get out there, that's where I would start to see more traffic. And I think that's potentially one where we could benefit from having a sidewalk at least on one side of the road, as I do see a lot of walking traffic coming up from that area. So I guess I would be proposing that perhaps Jensen Avenue West be reconsidered, or maybe further convince me that it's really not needed, because I think it is needed for that area.
Mr. Doxey, do you have any further comment?
Well, not really. It's something that we could consider if council were to want to add a street or a block. They could certainly amend the reso to incorporate that as into the pedestrian priority network. If there were specific blocks of street that were wanted to be added, or if if there's something more, I guess.
That's the one I would propose, would just be Jensen Avenue West, and to at least have a sidewalk on one side of it connecting from Molliette to McMillan.
Yeah, it does admittedly have some multi-unit along it with some density. It's just for us, we were looking at that proximity.
I'm not criticizing your choice there as far as saying like you did a bad job. I think you did a fantastic job going over it. There's a lot of streets to go and a lot of considerations. I just, maybe a difference of opinion there for that street. I think it would be one that would benefit from it. So if it's requiring a motion, I'd put it as a motion to amend Jensen Avenue West to be included, as I mentioned. And if council agrees, then they can support that decision, that choice.
You're amending the motion.
I will.
Okay. I need a seconder for that amendment. Anybody want to? Councillor Patterson is seconding it. Any discussion on the amendment? Councillor O'Brien and then Councillor Chandler.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I was going to second for debate as well. Anyways, at this particular point, I like Councillor Fraze's suggestion about this particular street, but I would think that it would be best if maybe council had a little more time to look at the whole plan to find other ones. This little anomaly that Councillor Fraze has found is probably very true, but I think that there probably could be a couple others that upon further inspection on a much bigger screen than what we have in front of us right now. So all that I'm suggesting is perhaps we should hold off on making a suggestion for maybe additions to it until we've had a good look at the whole plan, and then do it at that time. From what Mr. Doxey has mentioned, they're working on an asset management plan as well, and I'm thinking maybe we could do a little suggestion or get together to suggest maybe that should be included in that. Would that be satisfactory through the mayor to Mr. Doxey? Would you be able to address it at that time in that asset management plan?
If I may, through your worship, yeah, that's something we could bring up for discussion as part of that plan, and it's just a simple breakout for unit rates at that point. So we could show you what it looks like with a few more and without a few.
Councillor Chandler, and then just before we go further with yours, let me just make the suggestion. Nothing says that this is cast in stone and it'll never change. I think Councillor O'Brien's point is well taken, in that we can go back with at a later time and go through the streets in more detail, because I agree, I'm going blind just looking at what's on this page as it stands. So I would think that would be my suggestion. We hold off making any changes to the recommendations by Mr. Doxey, and then let's all take a look at it and bring it back in the fall and have a real good look and see what other, just because I happen to agree wholeheartedly with the Councillor Fraze's suggestion. I think that should definitely have a sidewalk, but it got a sidewalk there, but should we have one over here, or should we have one over there? I don't know the answers to those questions. And if we piecemeal it, then we're no better off than where we were to begin with. Sorry, Councillor Chandler.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just a comment, and I think, I do agree with Councillor Fraz. I think that that is a fairly busy thoroughfare. We have a lot of kids walking from school from there and so on. So I think from a safety aspect, it would good. I would certainly want to see what sort of money that's going to cost. That could probably be a fairly large project, I would suspect. And I mean, is that going to impact any other projects that we have in the works? Should we look at it over a 2 years plan and that sort of thing? So I'd love to see a bit more debate on the whole thing would be great. Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien, I'm sorry, did the CAO have question or a point?
If I may, Your Worship, it might be helpful to review our 5-year capital plan with this in mind, because I think the map that has been presented by staff is a 20-year plan, and it might be useful for council to look at what is on the books for the 5 years coming up, and that way council can decide on a street specific basis or a project specific basis what they would like to see, and it just might make it a little bit more tangible in terms of the length of time. And so, for example, next year when we're looking at the capital plan for the 5 years, council may decide to remove a street from that plan and switch it out with another priority street. And so you can then have a more realistic figure of what the cost would be, because a 20-year plan, the costs are sort of guesswork at that point. I think that it makes it a little bit easier for council to look at the specific projects you can achieve in the 5-year time frame and then switch them out or add a sidewalk if that's not something that's planned. And you can then, as Mr. Doxey said, you can get a sort of per meter cost. So you can understand exactly what the difference would be from changing the standard.
Okay. Any other conversation? Councillor O'Brien, sorry, yes. And then Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question this time. I'm just wondering if what we've heard of late, would Councillor Fraz be willing to withdraw his motion, and so that we could maybe go back to the original motion for this, and so we can move forward on this, but that's up to Councillor Fraz.
If I can respond to that, I appreciate the comments I've heard. I think it's a good idea to always look through it and amend things as they go. Like the mayor said, nothing's cast in stone. So that being said, I do think Jensen Avenue West is one that would benefit from it, being that it's one that connects to kind of our hub main downtown core. I think every street off there benefits from having a sidewalk connected to the downtown core. So I'm going to let the Jensen Avenue West stand, and some I support, and I think there's no point in waiting till the fall or further for that one.
Okay, so the amendment is there. Councillor Greer, we're talking to the amendment.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I was going to mention much the same as Councillor O'Brien. I think we could, if we started looking all over town, we could be nitpicking here and there all over the place. I mean, what we're talking about is one of the main streets, but there's all kinds of other streets. And I don't know, I have the idea that we should leave this up to the professionals that know an awful lot more about traffic and about roads and about sidewalks than we do. But that's just my comment.
All right, thank you. Councillor O'Brien, one last time around.
Thank you. Although I am in favor of looking at that Jensen Avenue connection, I don't have enough information to vote affirmative on that at this time. There's costs involved, and as I say, as a priority as compared to other ones in the city, not clearly identified on this map. So I can't support the Jensen recommendation at this time.
Anybody else? But my view on this is that we're not asking for approval. I don't believe Councillor Fraz is asking for approval to spend any money, but just to change the category for which Jensen is. Would that be a correct assumption, Councillor Fraz? Yeah,
that's correct.
So we're not saying let's do it right now. We're not saying we can do it later. We're not saying it should be $12 a linear foot or whatever. It should be just change from A to B for now, so that we look at it in a little different light in the future. I think that's the proposal on the table right now, and the amendment to be added to this particular group of recommendations. So if there's no other comments, I don't see anybody else's hand up, then I'm going to call a vote on the amendment, and all those in favor of the amendment.
Aye.
1, 2.
Aye.
I believe it carries. All right, so that now we have to vote on the amended recommendations. And if there's any further discussion on that before we go to the vote, Councillor O'Brien?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I still had questions.
Yeah, that's fine. I figured you would.
Yeah, just for the original one, if I could, Your Worship, through to Mr. Doxey. When you mentioned the red lines we're talking about here, the dash line denotes sidewalks is missing on one side of both. I'm referring to that. Like in particularly on Stanford Avenue, I note that you have as a dash line where I am aware that that's a red line, which means it's a priority for pedestrian network, and yet there are no sidewalks on the other side. So am I assuming that kind of in your comments, I heard that you're going to be taking a hard look at those items where we're not even achieving the goal of one side of the sidewalk, that's going to be included in your asset management plan, that's going to be brought to us in fairly short order. Is that correct?
If I may, through your worship, yes, that is correct. So what we would do is anything that is shown to have sidewalk, we would incorporate that along with the pricing. It's part of the asset management plan that will populate the 5-year and the subsequent 20-year budgets that we bring forward. So it'll be in there. We wouldn't necessarily, it would be a separate conversation with council in terms of the asset management is about renewal of the assets and the infrastructure. We would have a separate conversation about, say, upgrade of infrastructure. So if there's shortfalls that we identify and they're not coming up for, say, a water renewal or a sanitary sewer renewal, that would be, we'd want to have that chat separately. So there may be some gaps in the PED network that we build a kind of a tangential risk analysis, quality of our level of service discussion with council when we bring forward the revised capital program.
As a follow-up, thank you. That's exactly what I'm looking for anyways. We can do it as under further study. I'm perfectly good with that. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments on this? All right, then I'll call the question. All those in favor to the amended recommendations?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? It's carried. Thanks, folks. All right. Just a matter of guidance here, if we could, from the CAO, do I have to, on the final adoptions for these 3 points, do they have to be done individually, or do they have to be, or can they be done as a group?
That is at the discretion of council. You can do them together or separately, whichever you prefer.
Okay, so I'm going to do them together at this point in time. If somebody wants to pull it out, feel free.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Fraz. Discussion here. All those in favor of all 3?
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried. Parks and Open Spaces Committee recommendations. Mr. Payne, are you still there? There he is.
Hello.
Glad to see you. Please give us your background on this issue.
So I think the, sorry, to the CEO.
Pardon me, go ahead.
Sorry, if I may, Worship. I think we typically have Director or Councillor Frass introduce it. He's the liaison for the committee, and then Warren is here to answer any technical questions that might arise.
I'm just going by what's on my agenda here. So
poor Warren got thrown in because Guy's on vacation. I talked to Adam and he's here to present this.
Please feel free.
Yeah, thank you.
Step right in.
Yeah, myself and Councillor O'Brien, we alternate month to month on sharing what happened with our Parks and Open Spaces Committee meeting. I asked to have Warren join us today just because he's got a little bit more background knowledge and information on the Kinhut project. I don't have all the information as far as reported in numbers and that to go off of, so I thought I'd lean on his expertise there. Overall, though, for our meeting, like we said, we had on May 7th there, as per the minutes. I think the minutes are pretty explanatory as to how this meeting went there regarding the garden project on Jensen Avenue Greenway and our park traffic circulation study. So as we go through each item, I can touch on it, and if there's any specific questions, I can give more information. I'm not sure. Actually, I thought the minutes were attached with this agenda, but I realized they're perhaps not. So as we go through them, I'll speak to them each individually then.
All right. I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor O'Brien, seconded by, did I see Councillor Chandler's hand? There you go. Councillor Chandler. Okay, discussion on this. Councillor O'Brien, you moved it.
As I understand it, thank you, Your Worship. We're handling this as each recommendation separately, as to the first one being the Kin Hut replacement.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. As after discussion with the committee, we came to the conclusion that there was an initial proposal anyways to remove the Kin Hut washroom facility, which currently has washrooms as well as some storage facilities in it, with the understanding that there would be a new washroom, which is currently planned to be built in that area. After further discussion with the parks individuals, Warren and Guy, we determined that the Kin Hut itself is still standing and it's in relatively good shape. And we have a request from the various user groups that they are desperately hoping for some user space from the city of Parksville for their sports equipment. So a suggestion was made, discussion was had to suggest that maybe the Kin Hut does not need to be demolished. It could actually be converted over to storage facilities for these different sporting groups, as well as building a washroom adjacent to it, a brand new washroom as we've currently planned. So we're hoping to do two birds with one stone. There was some suggestion, which would be determined later by council, on if there's a fee structure in place for the sport groups to rent the Kin Hut space. And that was the idea, that we thought that we could help two groups at once, and including an all access new washroom in that area as planned.
Okay. Any other discussion on this? All right, going to call the question.
Sorry,
Councillor Frass.
I was just trying to give it a little bit of time for council to ask anything, but I'll also let them know as part, and for the public that might be watching, for storage options, since there's 13 user groups that are looking for storage space. They're going to be looking at what other kind of options they can be, whether they need to be on site and where they might be, or if they can also be off site. So like one of the mentions there, whether it needs to be in the industrial area, perhaps, just as an idea, if they're just needing some kind of storage space accessible rather than using people's garages that maybe someone from the team isn't available and they can't access it and so on. So it's not just removing storage space, it's looking at what other kind of storage might be feasible for them. And Warren, I don't know if you have any other comments, if I might be missing something from the meeting there, or if you wanted to mention anything, feel free.
I guess my point is that the budget that we're looking at for the replacement of the washroom building is, I believe, pegged at $420,000. Design fees to be looked at $80,000. The concern is that with $420,000, we wouldn't be able to accommodate the storage space within the washroom building. And so we would be looking at either expanding the budget for the building or not allowing storage in the facility. I did have the opportunity to go down today and have a look at the storage lockers that are in place. They do have things such as wagons that they use to cart their equipment across the field with. And so I know that some of that could be difficult if stored in a location off-site. And also believe last year, for the first year, we allowed the use of a C-can adjacent to the Kin Hut building. So one of the user groups had quite a large additional space. So it's about trying to manage if there is storage space or not, and how big that storage space should be if it is included in the building.
Thank you. I have a question, if I could, on perhaps goes back to Warren, if I might. Is there any chance of extending the back of the onto the back of the curling club, some type of storage space there? We have lots of land in behind. Could we not put an addition across the back of the curling club to allow this storage to be there?
If I may, I think there's lots of different opportunities that could be looked at for storage. The curling club now is the land's leased to the RDN, and the RDN leases the building to the curling club. But I'm sure that something could be worked out with them there. I guess another concern for the Kinhut building is right now, as a kind of a sealed envelope, there aren't any safety concerns, but if we go into a renovation or construction phase with that building, we may have to look at what hazardous materials are left in there, and what we may discover from that building versus demolition of the building as well. So,
thank you. I'll be right with you, Councillor Chandler, but just to pass on a comment. The curling club, the RDN has agreed that they're going to turn over ownership. To begin negotiations. They probably would have if all the events of the recent past hadn't been on, for it to come over into the ownership of Parksville, so that it would be all under our ownership. That eliminates part of that problem and maybe the nice part of the solution if we can. So I just to clarify that. Councillor Chandler, and then I think Councillor Patterson.
I was down there a couple of days ago and just had a look at the back end of that curling area, and there is a storage unit in there that's in a chain link fence area. And I recall in the past there was some issues where there was some break-ins into that structure through the chain link fence, and it's not attached to the actual curling club, but it's probably 20 feet behind it in its own encased unit. And I'm not sure exactly who rents it. I believe it's baseball, but it has had some issues there. So having it inside a building would definitely be a real plus.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I think in our discussion, there was some comments about what actually is being stored in the Kinhut currently. And there was a mention of wheelbarrows or something. So with the Parks and Open Spaces Committee, did it get any feedback from any of the current users that store anything in that building at this point in time at the Kinhut? So I'm not sure, through you to Councillor Fraz or Councillor O'Brien.
Councillor O'Brien had his hand up, and I'm thinking he's indicating he may have an answer for your question.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to Councillor Patterson. When we considered the Kinhut as it was, the Kinhut already has a storage facility in it. It's like a closet more than anything, but it also has the original washrooms in it as well. So the proposal that we've come up with to eliminate demolition of that building, which has it's a pretty good bones on the building already. It's structurally it's good, and the thing is that it would be the removal of the existing washrooms that are in that building, and so that entire Kinhut as it is right now would be converted to storage only. So it would accommodate the wheelbarrows that they use for getting the equipment out, and their wagons and so forth that they use to get their baseball gear out to the field and stuff like that. So it would be plenty of room. As Councillor Fraz mentioned, there are 13 user groups already indicated that they would like space there, but it would certainly increase the amount of space that's there, and the building itself could definitely accommodate by just being hollowed out as it was, and saving on the demolition at the same time. I hope that answers your questions.
Can I have a follow-up, Your Worship?
Certainly.
Thank you. Through you to our CAO, through budget, future budget needs and deliberations, we talked about adding washroom facilities and everything, or expanding in that area. Is that in the next year, or in our next 5-year budget plan?
If I may, Your Worship, I do not know that answer off the top of my head. I don't have the budget for the 5-year budget in front of me, but I don't know if Warren knows. I think it's within the next year, but if I could defer to our parks foreman on that. Do you know, Warren?
If I may, I believe the design phase was to occur this year, perhaps into early next year, and then construction the following year.
Thanks.
All right. Anybody else? All right. And remember that we're saying a replacement project and investigate alternative storage. So, I mean, it's still got to go through the whole process before we get to the end result. Let's bear that in mind. So I'm going to call the question then, if there's no other discussion. All those in favor of the first recommendation?
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. All right, let's keep on moving. We had to get this Parks and Open Spaces Committee going. They take up all the time in our meetings, don't they? All right, Councillor Greer. No, I'm sorry, Councillor Frazen.
Okay, so for this next one, the garden space, it's, I think, pretty straightforward. There's a community gardens right now off the Jensen Greenway. And then there's a piece of property connected towards Bagshaw, between the community gardens and Bagshaw. And we're looking to speak to the Community Garden Society and discuss if they want to extend their community gardens out into that piece of land there that's not being used. And then also asking staff to look at other areas in the community that may benefit from community gardens. And it could be as likely, maybe perhaps that piece of Despard area up there. So that's about it for that one. If there's any questions.
All right, I need a mover and a seconder for the motion. Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Wilson. Discussion. Councillor Greer, Councillor O'Brien, since it's your motion, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and for the two Councillor Frazen's comments. The basis of this whole thing was to have a conversation with the Community Garden Society and so forth, that currently have an agreement with the city of Parksville for the existing land there, to consider expanding it into the space where the city of Parksville would, since putting through the Jensen Greenway, we would be at a point where we'd be looking at landscaping and putting some kind of a natural treatment to it, or gardens and so forth. And in this way, we could accommodate the Community Garden Society as well, as suggestions made that maybe we should come to some clarity as maybe the purposes of the Community Garden Society, with the suggestions of maybe if the community gardens are actually indeed on City of Parksville property, that maybe that one of those gardens could be actually contributing to the local food bank as part of the condition of them using the Parksville property, providing fresh vegetables and so forth to our Salvation Mount Arrowsmith food bank. So this was the conversation we wanted to have with them, want to ascertain that they were interested in expanding it, as well as maybe improving the production of it, and maybe expanding it and seeing if there's a need for expansion in the other areas of town, like on the far west end of town. So that was our proposal this time to pursue further. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chandler is next, and then Councillor Greer.
Light of everything that's going on currently. Thank you. In light of everything that's going on currently, I think, it would be great to see more community gardens, both in the space now that it's in, and maybe an expansion of that area. And I'd love to see a few more in different areas of the city as well. So that would be my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just going back over the history of this garden, and it's been a controversial garden going back to 2010. And there was times when all the people in the garden, working the gardens, weren't even from Parksville. And of course, now the garden has already expanded into the Greenway. And someday, I still have hopes that the Jensen extension will go through that area. I don't mind seeing gardens in some other location, but you'll never get them moved out of there if you expand it. I talked to one of the gardeners, and he wanted to run right down right down to the to 222. So they want to take in more land all the time. But anyways, before we go suggesting a lot of things to them, we should find out who actually are the gardeners. Are they all from Parksville? Those type of gardens were really made for people that had condominiums or apartments. And we discovered going back along a number of years that some of them were from out of town. Some of them even had houses in town, and they were using our water and our facilities. So I think there should be some more questions asked whether they need to expand, especially in that area. That's it.
Thank you. Councillor Fraz?
Just thought I'd let Councillor Greer know too. Part of this, having discussions with them, is going to be to see about inviting them to council, so we can have a dialogue with them, so we can ask questions like that. I think having the garden space in that greenway area too does preserve it for the option that if a road is to go through the Jensen Greenway, that space isn't being developed for anything else. So we're not receiving requests to from people to purchase it from us and develop it for something else. So it does preserve it for future uses of the city as well. That's what I understand to be the intent of it as well too. In the meantime, it's just land that we have to maintain. It's kind of an unsightly do nothing property right now.
I would go along with that.
Thank you. Anybody else? One of the two things that I'm going to caution on this. First off is we've just had two motions in a row with this direct staff to do something, direct staff to do something. Our staff are up to their proverbial backsides in work right now. So we've got to be careful how much we're directing back to staff to follow up on. So that's just my first one. I'm not saying it's not a good idea. It's not saying it's not worthy. I'm just saying that we've got to be careful of what we're referring back to staff on this. We've done a really good job for the last, 16 months or whatever it has been since we've been here, that we've been able to keep the workload at a reasonable level for our staff so that they can go. Secondly is I was here, Councillor Patterson was here, and Councillor Greer were here in 2010 when we went through this garden community, and Councillor Greer actually was absolutely right. When we took a poll, we found that a third of the people lived in Qualicum Beach that were using it. Another, and people were, there was only 2 or 3 people that were doing what we wanted it to do, which was for apartment dwellers to have a place to garden in. Having said that, and there were people that had their own properties that could have been gardening on their own properties that weren't, they were doing there. So that's fine. As it's turned out now, it's actually working very, very well. I mean, it's taken 10 years to get it to where it is, and it's working very well, and they should be proud of themselves for this. So we've got to make sure that whatever rules they're following has to be carried forward to the next group. I would much rather see a garden, a community garden put somewhere else in the city that's more convenient for other people, not right beside the existing one. Why don't we move to the other side of the city? We have land over in a number of areas where we could make those gardens viable instead of crowding them all together in that area. I think we also have to look at the proximity of where we are and what's the dangers of that, the damages that could occur in that area as well. So all of those things being said, I love the idea of community gardens in the proper places. I love it with the right rules in place. I don't like to tie our staff up on it unless we're really serious about it. If we're just going fishing, then let's not waste their time on it. But having said all of that, it's up to council where we're going to go. Councillor Greer has his hand up.
Yeah, just one more comment, and I go along with what you've said. I don't think staff is required to look into all of this. This is what council's for. We have a committee. Why don't we do all the legwork? And just come back with something that's already proposed and the city staff can go ahead with. I don't think we have to involve them in everything.
Councillor O'Brien, there's an interesting question for you, but go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to Councillor Greer as well. The idea, as Councillor Fraz has suggested, is that what we're seeking permission to actually invite the Community Garden Society to a council meeting where we indeed can do our work and can actually direct questions to them, as Councillor Greer has, and the mayor, as well, as to the rules and where they live, etc. And that's the forum, and that's where we should have that conversation. And then it's really not asking staff to do anything other than set up a council meeting for them to appear as a delegation. And then we as council then can pass the necessary resolutions to make it happen or not happen as council sees fit. So I see very little staff participation at this particular level of this instance. And I think that's the way to do it, so we can do our job.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments? I'll call the question then. All those in favor of the proposal?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It's carried.
If I may, the mayor, for the next one.
Yes, please keep going. You're doing well.
Okay, so community park traffic circulation study. This item was brought up as there was a couple spots in the community park noticed for pedestrians, mainly is where it came from, but things like crosswalks that don't connect to each other. There's some diagonal connections or walking paths from, let's say, from the Kinhut area towards the tennis courts. Right now, the typical walking path is to cut kitty corner to those paths rather than where the crosswalk provides it to go. As well, when you park in the curling rink parking lot, there's no sidewalks to access the park there from, so people are walking down the roadway. So it's looking at those types of items right there. Staff recommendation came that with the park stormwater master plan to then also turn over a community park traffic circulation study to them to give back recommendations and fix some of those pedestrian issues there. So mainly looking at crosswalks and sidewalks, my understanding.
Okay, I need a motion for the recommendation. Wilson, seconded by Councillor Fraz. Discussion. Councillor Wilson, and you start.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I listened to that meeting, and I had a few, somebody come to me about the circulation, and I agree that there need to be more sidewalks, but when you really look at the community plan or the community park, it's very car-centric rather than walking and cycling. So that might be just something to keep in mind when they're looking at that. And the other thing that was brought to my attention was the safety issue from the aspect of women and children entering the park. So there are different areas that that they might want to look at SEPTED issues with safety for women and children in particular, especially that one coming from Corfield down the stairs where they're towards the Kinhut, where there are nice little spots for people to jump out. As a man, you might not really be too concerned about that, but as women, we can be a little more concerned about safety. So that was just another thing that someone brought to my attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else that has comments, discussion? Councillor Greer?
Just a quick comment. I've been going down to that park for the last 20 years, and I go down twice a day sometimes, and I don't see a problem of walkways or adding sidewalks. I haven't seen a problem there at all, and it's not that busy at most times of the year that we would spend a lot more money on things such as sidewalks and crosswalks. I've never seen a problem there. Just my comment.
Thank you. I have a question for this. I'll be right with you, Councillor O'Brien. Just a question for the CAO. Do we have any idea what it would cost for a consultant to do a community park traffic circulation study?
If I may, Your Worship, I believe this item is in the budget already. I can't remember off the top of my head what the cost was, but I'm pretty sure that this item and the drainage study were both together for the same year. Warren, I don't know if you have it at your fingertips what the cost that we've allotted for that is? I think it was 50,000, is that right?
Yeah, if I may, I believe the budget is $50,000 and that the motion is to proceed with the consultants that are already completing the community park drainage plan, so we can save money on the subsequent plan, the traffic plan, by having the same consultants perform the duty. So a lot of the data collection would be already assessed by the same company, and they can move forward and roll right into the traffic management plan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Warren. Councillor O'Brien, was it you that had your hand up?
I'm good. Mr. Payne just described exactly what I was going to. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments on here? And it's in the budget for 2020? That's to the CAO, I'm sorry.
Yes, I believe it is. I'd have to double check. I don't know if Lucky's on the call, but yeah, I believe the two items were for this year.
Okay.
And kind of going hand in hand.
That's fine. And as long as it was, Councillor Fraz, you had your hand up?
I was just going to make a comment that I don't disagree with Councillor Greer as far as it's not something that's been a problem as far as like, you know, people get in each other's ways and vehicles and that. I think it's just an improvement as we look at making it more pedestrian friendly, more park friendly, and that things like connecting crosswalks, it just makes it smoother motion and more enjoyable experience down at the park. So I don't disagree, it's been a problem, but I think this is a good progress to be making.
Ms. Kaler.
If I may, Your Worship, I think that part of this study also looks at the one-way in and out for the road, which Council has talked about as being something that probably would make it a little easier to navigate through the park, a little bit safer than having to go down and turn around and retrace your steps in the vehicle. Is that correct, Warren? Do you know if that's part of the scope, was looking at a one-way through the park?
Yeah, if I may, the traffic plan is pretty comprehensive. It looks at accessibility to the park from the downtown, both getting into downtown and getting to the park from downtown, accessibility from the parking to the beach, would look at traffic movement through the park and determine whether we need a recommendation for a one-way out and the one-way back behind the curling rink. Looks at the pedestrian connections, as Councillor Frost discussed, crosswalks, crossing around food truck areas. It's a pretty comprehensive plan. It's not just a small project, and I think that it'll help set us up for all the subsequent projects that we have planned down the road.
Thank you. I'm going to be voting in favor of this one. I think, and we're not saying that we're going to go out and run out and do the traffic changes immediately, but when we're looking at things in the future, if we've got the plans already laid out, it helps when you're making other plans for other things, when you know that that's where the road's going, or that's where a new sidewalk's going, or whatever it may be. So I think it's a really good idea. If it's in the budget, that's all I was worried about, and we can go from there. Councillor Greer.
Yeah, just one more comment. We're just voting on the fact of doing the study. We're not doing this work right away.
Oh, no, that's it. Exactly.
It's just the
study. That's correct.
Yeah, I just want to make that clear.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of the study, no problem.
All right. Now that we've heard Councillor Greer's in favor, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. All right. We've got a fair number of notices of motion that have come up, and we've because they made the agenda, we're going to take them all as being active tonight, or this afternoon rather, and let's push through these. Okay, so first motion, I will introduce the pedestrian connection to the Rathtrevor Provincial Park. I'll just give you a little brief scenario of where we're at. I have, as everybody knows, have asked the region to come to the table to build the pathway from the river all the way through over to the road into that goes into Rathtrevor Park. The problem that we're running into is that the only place we can put the pathway is down beside, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank, the name of the road that runs.
98?
Plummer Road, is it?
Plummer Road.
Plummer Road. The only way we can do it is by putting the pathway beside Plummer Road down at the bottom. And the Ministry of Transport, first off, they have jurisdiction over that and over the Old Island Highway. So they have to design the roads because they want to do some changes there. It's not in their 10 or 15 or 20-year plan. It's out there in Never Land at this point in time. So at the region, we asked the region to send a letter to the ministry saying that we want the ministry to move this up into a higher priority on their list so that it gets done immediately, if not sooner. And it was decided at that time, and they've asked that we will do this, that we would do the same and ask for the region to, for the city to send a letter to the Ministry of Transport asking them to move it out, that it's a high priority to us as well, so that they get it from both sides. And it's just a communications piece at this point in time, and that's exactly what we want to do. So I'm making the motion. I need a seconder for the motion.
I'll second the motion.
Councillor O'Brien is seconding. Any discussion on this? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Councillor O'Brien, you're up next with your motion.
Need to unmute.
Yeah, unmute.
I hit it twice. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Don't have to be sorry. We'll get this all figured out by next meeting when we don't need it.
When we're all done, we'll get it done.
Yeah.
Okay,
exactly.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'd like to propose the following motion, if I may, at this time. That council return to the forum at 6 p.m. to host the regular meeting of council in person on June 1st with appropriate distance protocols in place for councillors and staff, and further, that the public be permitted to attend, with limited numbers being permitted to enable compliance with distance orders.
I need a seconder for that motion. Councillor Patterson is seconding the motion. Any discussion? Councillor Greer?
Yes, the way I read this motion, is this going to be continued from June 1st, or is this just until fall?
Oh, this is
Going through to Councillor O'Brien, I guess.
Thank you, Your Worship, and referring to Councillor Greer, this is to moving forward as per our original schedule pre-COVID.
Which means that we go back to an afternoon meeting in the come fall.
Oh. Yeah.
Yes.
As a follow-up, Worship, to Councillor Greer, yes, the suggestion or the resolution was passed anyways that we moved to a 6 p.m. meetings for the summer period. And at that time, we said that we would move to afternoon meetings in the fall as well. Yes.
Right. Correct. Good.
Correct.
I don't remember the exact when we said we were going to move it, but there was a specific date established.
I believe it's the time change, wasn't it?
I think you might be right, Councillor Frest, but we've got record of it, so we will move that at that time.
I think we did it 6 and 6, if I recall, because the time change was kind of up in limbo.
That's a good point. Yep. All right. Any other questions on this? Councillor Wilson? You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, I just couldn't get, I had something else on the screen, couldn't get to the mute button. Thank you, Your Worship. So I have to say, I'm not really in favor of this, and I'd like to give my reasons for it. I do appreciate that we all want to get back in forum to our council meetings, but I think that we're a little bit early, and I don't think right now it's necessary to hold the public meetings when we have the option to have virtual meetings. It also requires staff to sanitize surfaces and monitor safe distancing, and it will add an unnecessary risk for germs to spread to higher risk individuals, including those 60 and a few staff members like myself. BC's Restart Plan, along with WorkSafe BC for municipalities, advises on their website to eliminate in-person team meetings or modify them to incorporate technology such as conference calling and have online meetings. So I I think that right now, because we're just opening up, I would rather wait a little bit on this and get things open up slowly. And I'm not sure how it works in the city right now, whether all staff, how they might feel about going back. I definitely don't think right now the public should be in the forum yet. I think I'd rather see this phase in a little more slowly. And honestly, they've done studies that show that this virus can spread. It travels up to 12 feet when they've done these studies in a closed environment. So unless everybody's wearing a mask, yes, we can have social distancing to 2 meters, which is about 6.5 feet. But I think that the other thing that the CDC found, that the virus can spread more readily in an indoor setting with poor ventilation. So I don't know how our ventilation is there. I know with airlines, they're stepping up their ventilation so that they can get the airline up and running, because people are enclosed in a small space. They advise that windows be open. I don't think that's possible in the forum. So just right now, I think it's maybe a bit soon, and I would rather hold off. Let's see how some of this next phase opens up, because we can do Zoom very well. So that's my feeling on it.
Thank you. Councillor Fraz.
A question for the mayor and our CAO. Considering that we've been able to host meetings through Zoom, is there any possibility that if this motion passes and we go to resume them in the forum, that anyone who doesn't feel comfortable attending could still participate via Zoom, or still be electronically present for our meetings? Is that I know we're allowed to do phone in for the meetings, but has this allowed us to further remotely work for those who can't attend?
Would the CA like to speak?
If I may, Your Worship, yeah, Councillor Fraz is correct. Our current bylaw allows us to have everybody except for the chair participate electronically, but the order that's in place does allow us to have our meetings fully virtually, which is actually not allowed by the charter. Oh, sorry, my dog's going to start barking. So it would be a little bit challenging, I think, for staff to figure out a hybrid. I think we could make it work. I'm not sure that we have the greatest capability in the forum for the Zoom meetings. We found it was a little bit challenging on the audio, I believe, when we first tried to do it, where the mayor was present and the rest of us were kind of participating with Zoom. We can certainly try our best to make it work. I know that we've tried it out where we can live stream and perhaps not use the audio, but then that might make it very difficult for folks that are in the audience. So we would certainly look into it and see what we could do to accommodate, but it may be that the person would just have to listen and then watch themselves, like listen kind of on a speakerphone and then watch the live streaming themselves from their home. So I'm sure we can find some way to make it work if there's 1 or 2 members that are not comfortable attending in person.
All right, Councillor Greer.
Yeah, I'm of course all in favor of getting everybody back in action here, but to deal with the Councillor Wilson's problems, maybe we could leave it until the 2nd week in June and give it another couple of weeks, but sooner or later we got to get back into action here. So it'd be fine with me if we went we'll do the first meeting in June viral, and then do the rest, take a look at it after 2 weeks.
All right, any other comments on this? Councillor Fraz?
Only other comment would be, we deferred an item earlier, and the wording
I
I
was going to
used
bring
is
that up.
to the next meeting, and it was in anticipation that we would be back in the forum. So I don't know if that could be amended, because the intent was to allow the public to be able to come and speak to it. So that's just a consideration there. I do agree with Councillor Greer as far as like rushing it. There's whether it's next meeting or 2 weeks from now or from then, I don't think it makes a huge difference. We're already comfortable using Zoom as it is, so I could go either way. if it meant having full council presence, I guess I'd like to know if Councillor Wilson would feel comfortable if it was into mid-June versus June 1st.
Okay, Councillor Wilson, I think that was aimed at you. So
Yeah. Thank you, through the mayor. I can't say that I'll be comfortable until I feel that the health minister has, Dr. Bonnie Henry, has declared things are a little safer. I think if I would feel much more comfortable if there were masks, there were further distance. As I say, I am concerned about the public. So yeah, and honestly, I have not been in a store since this started. I've been asked by 3 nurses around me who are my neighbors to stay away, and at my age. And so I've honored them for that. They shop for me and I'm fine. I walk my dog, I go out, but I'm not sure I see the necessity when they ask people my age and younger people to stay home. So I can't say I'll be comfortable, Councillor Fraz, at that time, but I might be. Things might change. I think I'm open to things changing and us reassessing each time, but I'll be honest with you. Right now, no, I wouldn't be comfortable today.
by the way, at age 36, I think you're okay, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Fraz, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I appreciate her concerns and in fact everybody who takes the measures to for the safety of the community. We just wanted to make mention too, is my view is that with Dr. Bonnie Henry, she speaks on the province-wide level, so things are different whether it's in Prince George to Vancouver to here in Oceanside or on the entire Vancouver Island. And one thing that we have seen is that there hasn't been any confirmed cases in Island Health Region on Vancouver Island since May 7th. And there's only one active case being in the hospital, unless things have changed in the last couple hours or so. But I think that puts the risk at extremely low to where I think it'd be difficult to find. They've opened up the testing to everybody who wants to get tested, and on top of having a self-assessment tool available online. So, perhaps we can put in measures like anyone who is in attendance must use the self-assessment tool before attending council meeting. I know this is things that are in place if you're going to go visit a healthcare practitioner, an RMT, for example, it's a requirement for them. So maybe that's a way that we up our caution as we get back into it, because I appreciate your concern for your health. And I do think it's a safe time though for us to be looking at getting back together. And I would like to see the public included because they deserve a chance to be speaking to these issues as well.
Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I'd like to basically go along with what Councillor Fraz has said. I believe we do need to get back. I need to think to myself that there should be safety issues put in place, maybe limit the delegations, maybe potentially limit the public itself other than delegations. And we need to get back to the business of having delegations come in and potentially that need to see us, because if we all remember, we're going to be shut down for the whole month of August. So we don't have a whole lot of time to deal with certain things. And I just want to be sure that, I realize and we need to be cautious, but I think there's lots of caution put in place with the system that's now being looked at by the city. So I'd like to see us get back in the building.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien. You're muted. There you go. Oh.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I'd like to also just comment anyways that we're taking a lot of heat, or I'm getting a lot of calls and so forth from people say they're being cut out of the democratic process because either they can't get in on the Zoom or they don't feel it's satisfactorily providing an opportunity for the public to comment and so forth. And that's what we're supposed to be all about, open and transparent. So I believe I understand everybody has the right to make that selection of whether they're comfortable or not. And I totally agree with that. But the thing is that in this particular case, I think we have a job to do, and that's to be transparent to the public. And I think we've got to get back to it.
Thank you. I believe we're in very unusual times. We have come through very unusual times, and we're about as open and as transparent as we possibly can. And Councillor Fraz is wearing our team mask. But we're, you know, what I would like to suggest is perhaps what we could do is push it for another meeting, and then next meeting have that conversation again as when we're on Zoom, and say, all right, are we comfortable now? Are we getting more comfortable? Can we do this? Is everybody going along with it? And then set it for the second. I think the group that we're talking about, and they have every opportunity. They can call us. They can email me anytime, mayor@parksville.ca. They can mail me with their concerns, and I've been getting their stuff, and I forward it on, and it's processed to each and every one of you. So we do see all of the concerns that are being expressed. So I don't buy the fact that they're not getting a chance to speak. We were elected to be their representatives, and we were elected to carry it forward. So I do believe that that is being done to the best we can under these conditions. And you know, we're gonna fumble our way through this for the next while. I honestly don't think anything's going to change here between now and until they find a vaccine, which could be 12, 18, 24 months. It may be forever. We don't know the answers to this. So at some point in time, we got to get back on the horse and get it started. But if there's a bit of a uneasy feeling at this point, I think in fairness, we've got to look at that and we've got to take that into consideration. So I'm prepared to suggest that we push to our open meeting. Instead of saying the first, it would be what, the 14th? I'm looking at the CAO, but she doesn't know I'm looking at her because she can't tell from here.
June 15th.
But June 15th? Okay, so move it tentatively to the 15th, and then on the first meeting on Zoom, we could then at that point in time evaluate it again and look at it in fairness.
I would second that.
Okay, hold on for a second. We've got all kinds of hands up here. The CAO would like to speak, and then Councillor Fraz. And
apologies for jumping in there. If I may, Your Worship, I'd just like to maybe speak to the item that was deferred until June 1st. We could reword that item or clarify that that item be deferred until council meets in person. And that way it gives the flexibility that council can decide, you know, when that's going to be, and it provides a little bit of uncertainty perhaps for the property owner. But I think if the intent of council is to allow people to speak in person, that might give you some flexibility on that. Just thought I'd throw that in there.
thank you. My concern with that is that every item that comes up that somebody doesn't want it back, then they will push to have all of them deferred until they get back to have this, to have their input. And that is, you know, that is an issue. Councillor Greer wasn't next. I'm sorry, I didn't write it down.
No, I just was going to second your motion. I'd go along with having the next meeting virtual and then going back and discussing it at that time after the next meeting.
Thank you. Who else had their hand up? Councillor O'Brien, thank you.
Yes, well, I got a problem with that because the thing is that we did already pass that motion anyways earlier to defer that other item. And we voted on it based on the fact that we were meeting in person June 1st. And that's what we voted on. And that was part of the reason I voted for it. So the thing is, but now we're suggesting that this is going to not be put through to whether we're not going to be meeting June 1st. So this person that has requested that previous motion on the land purchase that is going to be deferred until they don't know how long. And I don't think that's fair.
That's a fair comment. Any other comments on this? Councillor Fraz, and then I'll step in again.
The only thing I a little bit struggle with too is looking down at further motions that are coming. We're talking about opening up further things in the city, and there's a part of me that goes, if we're going to be advocating for opening up and helping out different businesses and getting and encouraging people to get together and go have lunch and so on. There's a part of me that says as leaders too, we should be showing our comfort in the situation and the risk being minimized. I don't think it's fair to be saying for other people too, that it's like, it's okay for other people to go and get together, but you know, we're going to maintain our distancing. I think there's kind of a meet you halfway, and again, with the risk being so low right now, I do think it's time to be opening that back up. So I do like the June 1st. Like I say, I'm comfortable wearing masks and agree to doing the self-assessment tool and those kind of measures. We can have hand sanitizer. We know all the foundational protocols that are in place, which help flatten the curve. So I think as long as we all agree to maintaining those, I think June 1st is an appropriate time. Further to the other petitioners and so on, when I spoke to the fellow, part of the reason why I thought it was important to give him a chance to speak is he felt that getting 26 signatures on a petition during a time of social distancing was a huge feat. It's not a time when you can go door to door and be speaking to people and get the normal response. So potentially it's even larger. So I think it's very important that this neighborhood gets a chance to speak onto it, because I think it's a lot larger than what we've witnessed out of it. So I still think that with the June 1st is probably the appropriate time. And I just wanted to hear that, would there be any agreement to, if we were to have face masks and self-assessment tool and follow those distancing protocols that we know work, would that not be adequate to resume our meetings in person?
Councillor Greer?
I'd go along with that, except for the masks. I don't agree with those, because I don't think they're necessary, for one thing.
All right, I saw somebody's hand move here. Did I not? Councillor Chandler?
Yeah, I would agree that we get back in and allow anybody that wants to wear a mask to wear a mask, but not make them mandatory, and just have all the safety factors in place.
Kiva? I'll get to you in a second, Councillor O'Brien.
My apologies for jumping in again, but that is actually the recommendation from the medical health officer. There are some people that for other medical reasons actually cannot wear masks. So I think that we actually cannot require our staff or members of council or other members of the public to wear a mask. But we certainly can encourage them on a voluntary basis, but we just don't know the underlying health implications for individuals.
Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Brien?
I agree to that as well, that those that wish to wear a mask can, but it's not mandatory that you wear masks. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. So
the
reason to wear a mask is to protect someone else. So wearing a mask, I could wear a mask, but that won't protect me if somebody in the room is a carrier or has a silent carrier of this or pre-COVID. So to me, it's I'd still say there's no rush. We're just opening up, and so we wait another 2 weeks. It's not the end of the world to have a look and see.
Going around one more time. Anybody's got something to say it now, or Councillor Chandler?
For Your Worship, comment to Councillor Wilson. And Councillor Wilson, I totally agree, with where you're coming from and your concern. I guess what I'd like to say is that we do have the option of you being either in the same building, in a separate office where you could be on your computer, or you could be at home still, and we could all be still working in conjunction with each other with the technology that we have at our disposal. And it may be somebody else that decides in the next week, one of the other councillors, that they want to be home too as well. So that would give us all that option. So I would still like to look at moving forward and using technology at its best.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson, please.
Thank you. Councillor Chandler said that as well. I think that we are moving into a different age, definitely with technology and being present and not necessarily being in the same room. And
Oh,
I know
geez.
that, oh, Councillor Greer is making sure everyone's awake.
Technology.
I know
I
that
just went
there
to
has been,
sleep there.
I know there's been times when I've been away that I could attend, I could not attend in person a meeting, but I could via a teleconference type aspect or Zoom. And I think that that will be a way of the future going forward. So I absolutely respect Councillor Wilson's opinion and where she has concerns and everything too. But I do think that moving forward, the June 1st meeting back in the forum is required, and that we can make allowances and for her to not necessarily be in the same room, but make sure that her voice and her concerns are met, and that she has a voice at the council table as well. Those are my
Thank you.
comments.
Thank you. All right. It is interesting times that we live. There's no doubt about that. I believe there is technology that we could handle the June the 1st meeting to everybody's satisfaction, as much as it could be, I guess. I'm going to vote in favor of this motion for June the 1st, because I think it's, you know, it's June the 1st, June the 14th, June whatever, or July. Eventually we're going to get there, and the world is not going to be that much different between now and then. So I think we've got to pull off the Band-Aid and get on with it. So I'm going to vote in favor of it, and I'm going to call the question now. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let it be known that Councillor Wilson is opposing. Thank you. It was a good discussion, a little bit longer than I thought it was going to be, but it was a good discussion. Councillor Patterson, you're up and away.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is in regards to a subdivision servicing bylaw amendment in respect to water meters predominantly. And before I make the recommendation, I would like, I did have a conversation with the Oceanside Development and Construction Association, one of the members, and I do know that they would like to have a little bit of weigh-in. So my recommendation is that staff be directed to review section 6.3 of the subdivision servicing bylaw and report back to council with options to reduce the regulatory burden for developers while balancing the needs to protect city infrastructure. With that being said, that there is some consultation with the Oceanside Development Construction Association.
Need a seconder for that motion?
Second that.
Councillor O'Brien, thank you. Conversation, discussion? Thank you. Councillor Wilson, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry, I missed
Thank
it.
you, Your Worship, I did.
Okay.
Just a bit confused because there was an email going back and forth between our CAO and Mr. Doxey, our acting Director Joe Doxey, about this. So I'm a little bit confused about this whole motion and what it means. And perhaps our CAO could address this.
If I may, Your Worship.
You may.
I've asked the acting director of engineering to be prepared to speak to this item. It is a technical requirement in our subdivision servicing bylaw at this time. And so essentially what staff are going to be doing if this motion passes is bringing back an options paper, so to speak, that outlines the pros and cons of some different options of approaching this. But I will let Mr. Doxey speak to it, as he has spoken to I believe it's just one individual that has raised this matter, but he has raised it as a significant concern. So I will let Joe, if the chair permits, provide the technical background.
If I may, through your worship. So we've done some preliminary background information on this, and there is some, as the proponent Brother Quester has illustrated there's some significant costs when you get into commercial, industrial, multi-unit type settings where the water meters per the bylaw are constructed in concrete water meter chambers or vaults. They're required to be located out at the property line. We have done some preliminary survey of Vancouver Island municipalities, and it's a bit of a mix mash. Nanaimo currently requires the same type of setup as we do. They are undertaking a review currently, is my understanding, but no decision has been made as to do away with it. But effectively, the ask would be to get rid of the concrete vaults and to locate the metering inside of buildings. So of course, there's pros and cons to that, because now you're talking heated space inside of a building versus a vault out front. So it's not going to be the right tool for every developer. And then there's operating costs and liability associated with putting them inside of buildings, because when the operations crews go in to maintain the fire screens on these, they could end up with some impacts. So if the motion passes, we'll want to have a more detailed discussion with the operations crews and make sure that we're really illustrating both the capital cost up front, whether they be borne by the city or by the developer, and then also making sure that we're fully understanding the operational impacts. So,
Does that help at all, Councillor Wilson?
Somewhat.
Okay. It's a big cement vault that's out at the front of your property, commercial properties. I have one on mine, and I fought it like crazy when it was time for it as well. And it cost rate between $65,000 and $70,000 to put it in, with the vast majority of communities across Canada allow everybody to put their water meters inside the building so that they can be read there. And that's really what it comes down to. So I would love to hear what the staff come up with in their reports and see what the pros and the cons are for this. You know, maybe they're right. Maybe that's what it should be. But I'd certainly like to hear it, because we're trying to cut the costs for construction costs, and $65,000, $70,000 is significant in the construction cost. So that's where we're at. Did I get a seconder on this discussion, or did we just kind of, Councillor O'Brien is seconding?
I already did, but I'll do it again.
All right, thanks for doing it again, just in case. Being old as I am, I forget sometimes. All right, any other conversation on this? I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Councillor Wilson, you're up next.
I am up next. So I'm going to make a motion on behalf of council that staff be directed to work with the Chamber of Commerce and the Parksville Downtown Business Association to explore ways to utilize sidewalk spaces and public-private parking areas to help support local businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic by expanding the options for additional seating while maintaining physical distance requirements. Should I do a background on this?
Can if we want.
Okay.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead, and then we'll do the second after she's given her background.
Oh, do you want to do the seconding first?
No, go ahead.
All right. So background on it is council received correspondence from the restaurant, food services, hospitality, and beverage industry asking that we support local businesses to increase flexibility for their outdoor patio spaces during the pandemic. And recently, the PDBI also asked whether we would consider parking spaces to allow something new called room to queue, where there are small shops and narrow sidewalks, Craig, for example. And they're using this in Vancouver and Victoria, calling it room to queue, so that stores that can handle only a few people at a time inside can queue safely. So that is the background on that.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Chandler, are you seconding? Okay, discussion. I've got Councillor Chandler and then Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, and this is a great motion. I think very important to all areas. I think it applies to other parking lots, not just downtown. And I think the other thing is it applies to, as Councillor Wilson had suggested, it's for somebody that's got a small queue there. They don't have the opportunity to have a whole lot of people inside the store. We can have clothing racks out in these areas, all sorts of things, kids, kids play things and all sorts of stuff. Obviously, understanding that we can't have stuff out in the street that's going to add danger, but just things for people to look at and to have more distance and space. So I think it's a great idea. Thank you for bringing it forward.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have a comment. Once again, we're asking staff to work with the Chamber of Commerce. Why doesn't the Chamber of Commerce or the Downtown Business Association come up with some plans for their individual people that require this? And then maybe we can approve it or change it somewhat. And that way we keep the staff out of it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Here's my issue. First off, by the time we start communicating with the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Business Association and go through all of this, I think we've lost the momentum that we're trying to derive for our restaurants. When you look at it, there's only 2 or 3 restaurants in town that are affected by having to put parking or take up parking spots, public parking spots out in the on the street. And so my thought was that why can't we just say to everybody here, let's just make this real simple. Why can't we say, look, if you own a parking lot and you have a parking lot and you want to take up 2 or 3 parking spots on your property, you don't need development permits, you don't need building permits, you can do it as long as it's done safely. That's really all these people want, is to expand their seating right now while this is going on. We have a problem in that the restaurants, and that's who it speaks to mostly, restaurants have been told that they have to cut down their seating by 50%. So by cutting their seating inside by 50%, we have to give them the ability to continue to do sales. I mean, they've just gone through 3 months or 2 months of no sales. So now we're opening up and saying, we're going to tie your hands for the next whatever length of time until we can make a decision here. I think this is, we're making it way too complicated. If it's on your property, go for it. If you want to take, you make the decision. You're the business person. You make the decision that if you want to sacrifice 2 or 3 parking spots on your property so that you can expand a patio, go for it. I think it's the right thing for you to do. As long as it's safe, we don't need to be involved with it at all. Now, having said that, if there's a couple of restaurants, as I mentioned, there's 2 or 3 in the downtown core that need to go out onto the roadway because they don't have their own parking lots. Those are the ones where we've got to look at how do we address them, and I think that can be relatively simple too. The public use permit, I think I'm not sure the exact terminology of it, but you can get a public use permit. The town of Qualicum Beach, I'll just be a second, Councillor Chandler, and then I'll let you go. The town of Qualicum Beach just passed it just at their last meeting, and they said, okay, you can have it in your, you can go out onto the road. All you have to do is put a platform that's the equivalent of the height of your curb, so that there is a bit of an increase in the height to protect the people that are sitting there. And you have to have the proper railings. And in fact, they've gone one step further and are saying, we'll build them and we'll rent them to you for the period of time. So those are the types of things we need. We don't, by the time we get talking to everybody and so on, we're stretching this out way past where it's going to be beneficial. Restaurants need help now. And I'm not sure I agree with putting clothing and stuff like that out on the street at this point in time, but maybe that's something we want to look at. But I'm just going on there. So anyways, I've prognosticated long enough. Councillor and Councillor Chandler. Councillor O'Brien, you're on.
Sorry, I saw Councillor Chandler up first. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. I made the mistake. Go ahead. You're up.
Okay.
Councillor Chandler has important things to say. It can wait.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I agree with keeping it simple is good, but I want to make sure that we do kind of include, yes, it is the restaurants downtown we're concerned about as well, but the other businesses that need to infringe onto the sidewalks. So in the interest of keeping it simple, our CAO had mentioned anyways, that the permit to utilize the sidewalks would just be waived, and that would keep the staff participation to a minimum. And just if we just make a resolution to advise the businesses that they're allowed to use it, after conferring with the staff for the proper permit. All that we're saying is we're not bending the rules. We're making special rules for special times. And that's all we're doing here. Let's keep it simple. But as you say, we got to get this going right now, because the thing is that they're opening up this next week, and I don't want to be like, we come to a conclusion next December.
Thank you. Councillor Chandler, you're next.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, I would like to make a suggestion that we put out an immediate news release and make everybody aware that they can go ahead and do this within the proximity of the area that they operate in. And then also, it is, as Councillor Greer says, I think it's incumbent on both the Parksville Chamber of Commerce and the PDBA to get very involved with their membership and find out who does need help and who wants to do this stuff, and have them work with their membership on that. Because I don't think this is going to go away very soon. We could be seeing this right into the Christmas season. And if people are able to put umbrellas out on the street with restaurant tables, that draws traffic. And if they have heaters out there, or they have whatever they have to make the business work, then so be it. And I think it'll be a really unique sort of look to the town when we see this happening. So I fully endorse it, and I hope it happens right away.
Ms. Keeler.
If I may, Your Worship, one of the things that I think might make this a little bit smoother is if we amended the motion to delegate the issuance of the license of occupation to the corporate officer. That way, it could be the mayor and corporate officer, or just the corporate officer. And that way, at the staff level, we can issue the approval to use the sidewalk or parking spaces. I don't recommend doing it without the license of approval. MIA, our Municipal Insurance Association, actually has some guidelines for us on that. And we participated in a legal seminar today where they gave us some really good tips on how we could craft those licenses of occupation. But what would help us, I think, expedite them is if the motion is somewhat amended to delegate that authority under the parameters that we have to follow with insurance and whatnot, so that staff can issue those. If I may request that amendment be considered.
I think that's a great amendment. I really like that idea. I also would like to put in here that it's very clear that if it's on your property, you can put a patio area on your own property without approvals, without permits or development permits or building permits or anything else. You just do it for now, and then make it good until December or January 2021, and then we can look at it again. But,
Do you need a seconder for that?
well, I think we have to do some amendments to this if we do. But can we, Ms. Weeks, are you okay to draft that up somehow? As an amendment or as a?
Yeah.
You
No
got
problem.
it. I need a seconder for the amendment.
I'll second it.
Councillor Patterson has seconded it. And based on that, is there any further discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Aye.
All those in favor of the amended recommendation?
No, aye.
Carried. It's carried. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the proposal, Councillor Wilson. All right. I'm almost, no, it says, does any member of council have any new motions, notices of motion? I think we've worn those out tonight, haven't we? All right, Councillor Frass.
I just have a question, I guess, to the mayor, and if it generates a motion out of it, that'd be fine. I'm curious as to what the plan is with sports spaces like tennis courts and fields and that. recognizing that we're into phase 2 now, where they are opening up recreational facilities.
I will bounce that question to the CAO if you don't mind, and she can tell you where we're at with it, because we have been having a lot of conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So this has definitely been at the top of our mind for several weeks, and we've been asking many different provincial agencies for some clear direction on this. And what we've basically decided, or what I've decided, is that if we don't get some clear information on the tennis courts by this, well, basically by tomorrow, what we are going to do is allow the courts to open up this weekend, we're hoping, for casual play only. So this would not be an organized, you know, there'd be no competition or tournaments or official training or anything of that nature, but it would just be if, say, I and my family wanted to go to the court and hit the ball around, or if I wanted to meet less than 6 people, is I believe the number that they're recommending right now, from unrelated households. It would be essentially used at your own discretion, no organized play, no special event permits, no tournaments of that nature. And then we would be directing folks to check our website and the provincial government website, which is called Via Sport BC, for their sector-specific guidelines. So for example, what we've been told is that the public health officer will approve guidelines for baseball, for pickleball, for volleyball, all the ball sports, and it would allow those teams, I guess, to get back to play. But they then have to provide us with an assurance that they've met those requirements before we would issue them a permit to use, say, the fields or the courts for a tournament. So I think that's a smart way to do it. We do obviously have some very good protocols, you know, the hand sanitation, not being there when you're sick, all of those things we all know so well. We will be putting signage out to that effect, and then just basically allowing people to make their own judgment call and be as safe as possible while being outside. So that's our plan. We were expecting, I haven't had a chance to check yet, but we were expecting some more guidelines to come out today, but it's just taking too long on the provincial side. We've been asking for 3 weeks, and we just keep getting told that they're getting on it, but we now believe that they're working as they should be with the sectors, the business sectors, so the salons and the restaurants and things of that nature. So I think we're fairly safe to take that approach. And so unless there's any serious concerns or objections from council as a body, that's basically what we're working towards, is getting the signage ready for this weekend opening.
Go ahead, sorry.
Just for the courts, we're not comfortable reopening the playground or the spray park for several reasons, but we are thinking that we can safely open the courts.
So just as a point of clarification, correct me if I'm wrong, you can have single play on the pickleball and or tennis on the courts, no problem. If you're going to play doubles, the person you're playing doubles with has to be from the same household on your team. Is that still going to be part of the game?
If I may, Your Worship, part of the challenge is that none of those things have actually been approved by the provincial health officer at this point. A lot of the organizations, I think, are getting impatient also. So they've come up with their reasonable set of guidelines. I think what we were planning on doing is putting up the generic, the orders, so no more than 50 people permitted at any one space, and obviously the 2-meter distancing and those types of things. And then we were going to direct people to the Via Sport website, which is the provincial body that's responsible for this. We don't want to provide too much detail because it hasn't necessarily been sanctioned, and it's not our jurisdiction to approve or not that approve that. Certainly, I think in some areas, exactly what you're saying, Marmaine, has been adopted, but that could be different for different, like pickleball might be different than tennis. We don't know, and we don't really want to take any responsibility for providing that guidance. So I think at this point, we wanted to provide the links through our website, and we were kind of thinking of a call before you play idea, you know, how we have call before you dig, so that people are getting their information from their association or from their group or from the provincial health officer directly, rather than relying on us to keep track of the various different things that people might be playing on our courts.
Okay. Councillor Frass, answer your question.
Yeah, I appreciate hearing that it's coming soon. It just I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I think how tennis courts and that can be picked apart so much when things like going to a restaurant. There's a lot closer contact and more handling of things, and it doesn't have nearly the same type of issue. So, and particularly when we have nobody in our hospital in IMO with COVID-19 and only one person in the island. And it's not a criticism at staff. I think it's great that we're doing this work. I think it's important that we look at having these kind of plans. Just seems like that when the aim was to flatten the curve, and now it seems like the aim is shift to completely stopping any transmission at all. So it's surprising for me, but I appreciate that and like hearing that it's opening up soon. Thank you.
Councillor Greer.
Yeah, going along with the same idea, I've got over 100 guys phoning me about baseball. And we have, I think, 10 teams now in the leagues, and they don't see any reason why they can't be playing baseball. So it's difficult making up excuses for them all the time when it doesn't seem necessary, when the field's there and they could be apart. Baseball is something that you don't necessarily have to be side by side. But anyways, it'll be great when you see everything open.
Yeah, it's not making excuses. It's the facts that the priorities have to be established. First off, differences between a restaurant and pickleball is one is a business and one isn't. It's a sports thing, and we have to look at where the priorities lie for the government. I mean, those guys, in fairness, I'm not a big supporter of the provincial government at this point in time, as you know, but they've done a yeoman's amount of work in getting things done and through. So I think a little bit of patience here. We've come a long ways from when we started with this, and I think we're in this position because we followed what the government has said. So I think we've got to keep going with the guy that brung you. So that's the way I look at it. All right. Any other business? So here
I move to adjourn.
Yes, and before we adjourn, I'd like to remind everybody,
I move
our next council meeting will be Monday, June the 1st at 6 p.m. in the forum. We are only going to allow a certain number of people from the audience, and they're going to be spread. And Councillor Fraz promises to wear his mask as he is right now, and we'll go from there. It was a good meeting, folks. Thanks an awful lot. I need a seconder for the motion to Councillor O'Brien. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thanks a lot. Have a great day. Be safe.